Hello, my name is Camelia Kesasi. I would like to share with you my own experience with a condition that is called endometriosis. I have lived with this condition my entire life without knowing that I had it. And it wasn't until recently that I was diagnosed with it. So I lived with it for over 20 years. And of course, it was impeding my work life, my ability to have a social life, to function at a high level. But thankfully, I was intuitive enough to be guided towards ways to cope with the pain that were really good for my body. So I wasn't really using painkillers or anything like that. I was mostly using yoga, meditation, and diet, which is actually a good thing for endometriosis. I learned that later. So in hindsight, I just realized how much in tune I was with this condition, even though I didn't know I had it. So the reason why endometriosis is very hard to diagnose is because in most cases, you have to go through a laparoscopy, which is a small opening in the abdomen, for it to be seen or found. In very extreme cases, you can see it through an MRI. So my personal story is pretty incredible. That's why I wanted to make a video about it. In August 2019, I was flying from Algeria, which is my home country, back to the US. So I had to fly from Algiers to Frankfurt, Germany, and then from Frankfurt to Chicago. During the flight between Frankfurt and Chicago, I experienced extreme pain. So the pain started feeling really intense on my lower back. I couldn't really sit on my seat during the flight. So I kept thinking, this is weird. It feels like kidney pain, because I had experienced kidney pain in the past. But then I started feeling an overwhelming pain in my abdomen too. And then it started increasing the longer I sat down. At some point, I had to stand up and I had to go to talk to a flight attendant and ask for a painkiller or something that could basically stop that pain, because it was not bearable, especially that I was flying. It's not like I had an option to do anything else but to sit down. So when I talked to the flight attendant, they said they couldn't give me painkillers, and I was so used to not taking painkillers with me. I remember even before the flight I did some yoga. But the problem is that I ate so much wheat back home that my body had a big reaction. So I was waiting for the pain to go away, but nothing happened. Instead, it got more intense, it escalated, and I did not know what was happening, but I knew something was very different. Like, it's a pain that I never experienced before. It was radiating pain, and it made me feel like I couldn't breathe, and I felt like I was about to faint. So at some point, they took me to a business class seat, and I was basically almost lying down on that seat. I wasn't sitting down. And they called a doctor that was a passenger in the flight, and he just sat next to me. And he kept telling me to breathe. Everybody thought it was a panic attack because it looked like my breath was so irregular, as if I was just stressed out. But it wasn't. My body was going through something very particular and interesting. So immediately I asked for some water and salt. So they brought me this bottle of water and I started licking this salt from the little bags that they give you in the airplane. I started just licking it. Everybody was watching me. I was like, I don't care. This is just what I feel like I need to do. So I just kept licking the salt and drinking the water, licking the salt and drinking the water. And it felt better, a little better in the beginning. I felt like I could manage it. I was able to breathe better. So I kept doing that. I didn't know why I was drawn to that at that point. I didn't know anything that was happening. I just saw the reaction of my body. Then, so it was intense pain during 2 hours until we landed. So the pain was there during the entire flight, but increased, and it got to an unbearable point for 2 hours. And I ended up in a wheelchair. When we were landing, they brought a wheelchair to take me basically out of the airplane, and because I couldn't walk. And then they asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital, and of course I didn't know what to say, but there was no other option, because I was just gonna wait there to be picked up. I would have to be in a car seated for almost 2 hours to come back home. So it wasn't an option for me. So I said, yes, I am okay to go to the hospital. So an ambulance came and they took me to the hospital. They gave me some painkillers, and then they did some exams on me, and they figured I had a ruptured cyst in my ovary. So a cyst burst in my ovary during the flight, and it started bleeding internally in my pelvis. That's why my body was having a bad reaction. Any type of internal bleeding that happens in your body can freak out the body to a point of fainting. So obviously I realized, okay, that makes sense. And of course in the hospital they were worried. They said, you gotta stay here for the night just so that we check that your ovary is not gonna get more damaged by this, because we don't know what happened, the extent of what happened. But I felt like the nightmare was over. I said that I would go see my OBGYN when I go back home. So I felt like I was ready to leave. So I went and saw my OBGYN at that time, and I was diagnosed with endometriosis. So I always knew I had cysts. Every time I went to the doctor, they would tell me, maybe you have PCOS, or you have these kind of things. But I never got the diagnosis of endometriosis. The reason why this was diagnosed as an endometriosis is that the doctor saw that my cysts weren't changing in size. Of course, one of them left, but the other one on the other ovary was there. And the doctor suspected that it was an endometrioma, which is a chocolate cyst. These are specifically linked to endometriosis. But unfortunately, once you have cysts that are endometrial cysts, it's an advanced stage of endometriosis. It's not a beginning stage of it. So, of course, I tried to treat it in any way possible once I knew that it was there. It made sense. I was really relieved by the fact that I had a name for what was happening to me, because I never could eat gluten without a reaction. I never drank coffee. If I drank it, I would drink just a little bit. I knew I had bad reactions to coffee. And of course, with sugar, I didn't dare to, because I was kind of addicted to it. I didn't dare to go off sugar, even though I knew I had a really strong craving towards sugar that was not natural. It always has been that way. So I don't remember ever having no issues in my digestive and reproductive system. And of course, my periods were awful periods. Like I would talk to my female friends and they would say, oh, I went jogging on my period. I'm like, you jog on your period? How is that possible? It didn't make sense to me. I thought maybe I was just too sensitive to something that was very normal. So I just judged myself a lot about it, because I would look around and see that, yeah, periods are painful, but they are not debilitating. You don't have to take a day off because of your period. You don't have to stay in bed all day because of your period. But that was my life, and I didn't know it was, I mean, I knew there was something abnormal, but I didn't know how to explain it. And of course, intuitively, I felt that there was something really abnormal. And that's why I went on this healing journey since 2012. I just kept exploring what was going on with my health. I kept exploring that intimate connection that someone can have with their body. I kept working on finding the right lifestyle for my body to heal. And thankfully I did that, because it would have been even worse to not do that. I would have been on really strong painkillers, and maybe I would have had surgeries one after the other with no results. So I basically knew what was going on, but I wanted more solutions, and I wanted maybe faster solutions. So I explored the medical side by just learning about it and researching. What I discovered is that there is very little research about this disease. In fact, it's a condition that is very old, but it's almost as if it were just a new condition, because we're finally talking about it. That's why I'm so inspired to be able to share this with you, because it's time to really talk about how it's out there and how it really changes the quality of someone's life to have this disease, especially if it's in an advanced level or stage. Even though some people would argue, because some people that have very little endometriosis can have tremendous pain, and people that have endometriosis all over their pelvic area can actually have less pain. So science didn't figure out the correlation between how much endometriosis you have and how much pain you experience. From my perspective and my own study of it, what I discovered about the medical approach is that it can't be the only thing. So for example, some people say surgery is the solution for endometriosis. So I'm gonna share with you my own experience with that. I never went through the surgery, but there's a reason for it. Recently, just last year, I was opening up for the idea of surgery, because I tried hormonal therapy and it never worked out for me. It actually made me feel sicker and more off balance than anything else. And even my doctor said that a lot of women don't respond well to hormones or synthetic hormones, and it's very common. It's not like it's an easy thing to go through, because there are so many changes that happen when you actually take synthetic hormones that the body is not comfortable with. So I decided to look into surgery because of my curious mind and my scientific mind. I have a scientific background. I used to be a chemical engineer. I still have that scientific approach that I keep with me all the time. I can't get rid of it, even though I'm an intuitive and I made that to be my career. And I actually discovered that endometriosis was a big part of that. The fact that I changed careers was because I was in so much pain. I couldn't have a normal standard career. So it kind of pushed me to do something that was more in alignment with my heart, so that I come back to my natural health. But anyway, I explored the route of surgery, and I felt that it could be a good thing to combine whatever I was doing with the surgery to see if that could help. So it was a requirement that I would get an MRI before the surgery to see the extent of whatever I'm experiencing. And wonderful news! My type of endometriosis was extreme. The surgeon was kind of mind blown by the results, and he didn't look very happy about the results showing on just the MRI. So we didn't do a laparoscopy, and it was clear that there was endo there everywhere. So we could see that endometriosis was around my bowels. The left side of my intestines was even more covered than any other part. And it was reaching my bladder too. And it was everywhere in my pelvis, basically. So for those who are familiar with endometriosis, it's this endometrial-like tissue that is supposed to stay inside the uterus, that travels outside of the uterus and attaches to different organs in the body. And sometimes it even reaches the eyes and the heart, which is extreme. In my case, it was all around the pelvis, and it felt like I lived that way, like I had a tied pelvis. So when the adhesions go a little bit everywhere, they don't only act as scar tissue, they actually act as endometrial tissue that bleeds every cycle. So inflammation keeps coming back in the pelvic cavity, which is so unnatural and so uncomfortable and so painful to live with. And when it reaches vital organs, it's very dangerous. When I got the diagnosis, I was shocked because I thought, I didn't know that it could go this bad. I thought it would just stay around the fallopians and the ovaries and stuff like that. And I realized, no, that all the issues that I was experiencing, thinking that something is related to my bowels and another thing is related to my bladder, and it was all coming from one source, which is endometriosis. So again, there's that aspect of being relieved to know the source. But there's the other aspect, because back then I was thinking maybe I had some hope with surgery, but the options for this surgery weren't just about removing the adhesions, like an excision type of surgery, which is laparoscopy. It was way more than that. So the surgeon said that it would be involving removing a part of my intestines and removing a part of my bladder and perhaps even parts of my genitals. I was not happy about that, so I felt it was something interesting to do. I gave myself about 3 weeks to analyze everything, do more research, and see if this is actually worth it. I even reached out to some friends and family to really see what's going on. Am I Am I the one that is skeptical about this, or is it really dangerous? And I finally figured that, for me at least, it was very dangerous to do this surgery, because that would mean, instead of dealing with the problem at the root of it, which is where this endometriosis is coming from, I would create another bigger problem by damaging parts of my internal organs. So it didn't make sense. And the surgeon clearly said that endometriosis could come back because we're not getting rid of it. So I felt as though I was given this solution that wasn't a solution. And I kept thinking, if it was an excision laparoscopy, which means kind of removing the excess scar tissue around just to free up the organs and all that, I would be more open to that. But if it is to cut parts of other organs, then I don't see a point. It's not gonna fix anything. So it seems like a quick fix, but it's actually a bigger problem to deal with in the long run. During my 3-week research, I realized that many women that did the surgery had to do it over and over again. Some women every 4 years, some women less than 4 years apart. And that they had to take drugs before and after the surgery. That they had to remove bigger parts of their bodies. Some women had hysterectomy and still suffer from endometriosis. In some cases it did work for some other women, but it caused other issues like gaining weight and imbalanced hormones and all that. So it's difficult to just count on one solution and not see this as a condition that has to be treated holistically. So I refused that surgery. I said no to it, and I started exploring deeper ways to deal with this condition. So of course I kept researching who is out there that knows how to approach this in a different way, in a more maybe natural way or more holistic way. So I did some research and I found some people. I found some people out there that wrote books about it, that are doing great work around helping others heal. But it still wasn't completely resonating with me, because I felt as though I was given this condition to unlock something with the help of my intuition. So I kept looking into that. And what I realized is that with this condition, endometriosis, first, there is no one perfect approach. We're all different people, and we all have to tune into our bodies to see what is best for us. The root cause of this condition is deeper than what is just happening to the person that is experiencing it today. It's way bigger than that and way deeper than that. When you look at this condition, you have to think about it as a solidification that happens. So first, just like water, so the phases of water, you have the gas or the vapor phase, and then the liquid phase for the water, and then the ice or the solid phase. With endometriosis, it's the same. It starts with the thought or the mental aspect, which is kind of like the air, and then the emotions, which is the water, and then it solidifies into the physical freezing of those concepts or thoughts or emotions in order to survive. So you can't just target the condition, you have to target what created the condition, all the patterns that created the condition. So when you break the patterns one after the other, and you take the time to do it, you can't rush this process, and then it's like reversing the process of what happened from frozen to vapor. It's like subliming the condition, subliming it into something that you can manage. So when I started doing that, I started seeing results. Just that intuitive awareness helped me to direct that intuition. Instead of direct it outward, I started directing it inward. And the discovery was just like this flowering of awareness, flowering of realizations, and this exploration became more and more fruitful and creative. I remember when I started painting around 2016, I felt as though painting or doing any type of creative work was a way for me to release emotions. It's very good to be creative when you have this condition too, because you're able to access those emotions, the heavy emotions, and to transmute them into something that can be more manageable and more beautiful too. So when you look at it holistically, just like baking a cake, you have to put the right ingredients in order to bake a good cake. If you miss 2 ingredients in that cake, when you bake it, it will turn out kind of not so tasty. So endometriosis is the same. There are certain ingredients that have to be met in your lifestyle, in the way you approach your day-to-day life, your relationships, your ability to connect with your body. So those aspects of the physical, the emotional, the mental, the energetic, the spiritual levels are very important, and if any of them is dysfunctional, it will create that imbalance. And of course we have to add the environmental aspect of this, because when you think about it, we live in a world that is so environmentally harsh to the body, to the nature of the body, that we have to have more protections around this natural body in order to help it function in an optimal way. The reason why it's important to have the right ingredients, it's not to have a perfect lifestyle, to have a perfect routine, that doesn't exist. Perfection doesn't exist. But working towards a place that is softer, more in tune with your needs will automatically help the endometriosis to go down, or at least the symptoms to go down, and maybe to disappear at some point, even though it doesn't have to be a goal that you pressure yourself with. So in order to bake that tasty cake, there is a way to do it. There's a recipe. I like giving baking as an example more than cooking, because with cooking you can be more flexible. With baking there is a chemistry that has to be respected, or else if you miss one thing, you ruin the cake. I see endometriosis like that, as a bad cake that was baked because some missing ingredients were not taken into consideration. And the missing ingredients analogy is one aspect of your life is in a dysfunctional state. 1 or 2 or 3 or more, but at least one. So when you start approaching the aspects of your life in a more attuned way, with more awareness, you start giving more attention to what is missing, and you start adding it to your life. And you can remove other things to your life, because it could be missing ingredients or ingredients that don't need to be there. If you're adding salt, too much salt to your cake, it's not gonna be a good cake because it needs to be sweeter. So that's the balance that needs to be found in order to bake a good cake. So about 1 out of 10 women have endometriosis. That's a lot of women in the world. So it's a very, very common disease that unfortunately is not at all treated the right way in general. It's seen as something to get rid of. But of course, the goal is not to get rid of endometriosis. The goal is to change or break the patterns that led to it. So instead of asking, why is the cake bad? The real question is, what are the missing ingredients? And what are the ingredients that I overused? So it's the same with endometriosis. You can't just say, why do I have endometriosis? Why me? It's a fair question. It's okay to ask it, but you won't get a response from that. The real question is, what is it that I am doing or focusing on or not focusing on that is keeping this in my body, or that made it appear in my body? It's very difficult to take responsibility for something that is subconscious or unconscious. But once you start asking the right questions around it, you start getting conscious answers. So having a recipe, a lifestyle recipe that works for you is very important to tend to your needs and to be able to lessen the intensity of this condition. And just like a good cake requires some staples, even if you can make so many different types of cakes, there are some basic staples that are required to make a good one. The same goes with your lifestyle recipe with endometriosis. You're a different person from everybody, you're a unique person, but there are common basic points that are required for women with endometriosis that can help with the condition and to be able to free yourself from all that pain and those vicious cycles. There's an addictive pattern too around endometriosis. It's the feeling of wanting what is harmful for you. For example, sugar is so harmful to women with endometriosis, but they crave it so much. Gluten is the same. It's like when endometriosis takes over your instinct, you start feeding endometriosis instead of feeding your own body. So it's important to have those distinctions between what is your instinct and what is coming from endometriosis. And in order to do that, you have to listen to both. You have to know the voice of endometriosis and to know the voice of your real instinct. We can talk about that in another video. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I would love to read them. Stay tuned for my next video. Take care.